Video games are not considered art by the vast majority of the gaming industry. You may think otherwise, and perhaps even believe that people in power think games are art. However, what you don't realize is that you're being gaslit harder than a 19th century London street lamp. When companies like Sega, Nintendo, and Ubisoft are making it more difficult to buy their past titles, do any of them really consider video games to be art? When one of those companies is suing a competitor because they patented how a game is allowed to be made, does that company consider video games to be art? When the biggest games on the market right now are either gachas that will shut down in the next decade, or ones that ask you for more money so you can get the complete experience, do companies making those video games really consider them to be art? When most games made by large studios adhere to the whims of diversity and inclusion consulting groups instead of the vision of the artists involved, do those studios really consider video games to be art? When it's becoming harder every day for titles more than 2 console generations old to be preserved in any meaningful way, does the video game industry really consider video games to be art? No, they don't. Except once a year in December when the Dorito Pope hypes all us little piggies at the trough to feed us the next year's pile of garbage. And, just like every gamer in current year plus 12, I love eating shit. The Game Awards are an annual ceremony where gamers get to vote on the best games of the year based on a handful of preordained picks in every category. They vote side by side with some of the biggest media outlets in the world to ensure their voices feel like they're being heard. This year marks the 10th anniversary of this corporate fellatio fest, but something is a little different, because this year, things have changed. Now, for those not in the know, 2024 is the year the slop flopped. Basically, a number of AAA video games got old yellered for the good of the world. And, because of this, a majority of games that were considered good this year were made by indie developers. Now, as a fucking poor who sleeps in the same rags he wears to his job in the Vietnamese shirt factory, I have played none of the games that have been nominated this year, except for 2. I've made great progress in my 100% Elden Ring run this year, stopping just short of Leyendell with about half the base game's bosses beaten. Keep in mind I started when the game launched, and I finished Chapter 2 of Zenless Zone Zero. Has it really been almost half a year already? Someone stop the clock. Because of this, I have no authority to speak about the entirety of the Game Awards, so you're better off watching someone who knows what they're talking about instead of me. However, my own stupidity hasn't stopped me before, which means I'm going to talk about all the things I've noticed while looking at the nominees. So, before Jeffrey sends lumbering Sony ponies to assassinate me for using his future trademarked phrase in my title, let's judge the Game Awards one category at a time, saving Game of the Year for last, because I said so. For the category of Best Game Direction, we have everyone nominated for Game of the Year. Wow, fuck you too, buddy. Now, for some reason, Shadow of the Erdtree is here, which isn't a full game, but more on that later. As for everything else, it seems almost entirely solid. I've heard Astro Bot was Sony's first good game, and real game since The Last of Us. Black Myth Wukong, despite being given the short end of different scores, managed to gain a major following thanks to its Chinese audience. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is also a game that some people played, keyword some, and Metaphor Refantagio is subversive imperialism I won't be mentioning for the rest of this video. I may be an asshole, but even I have moral standards. The odd one out here is Balatro, which I've heard is very fun, but I'm surprised to see it nominated so high. But as a card game with fun twists made by one developer, I'm glad to see it as some strong indie representation in the category. Even though its strange, wave-breaking games like Palworld and Stellar Blade aren't in the category, that's fine. I'm sure we'll see them in plenty of later categories. Moving on to Best Narrative, we see Final Fantasy once again, likely due to the changes made in the remade rendition. Yakuza gets some love here with Infinite Wealth, as well as Hellblade 2, a game you just remember existed right now. The funniest nomination is probably Silent Hill 2. You know, the remake with a story that was already told in a game made 23 years ago? Because nothing says great narrative like a copy-paste job. Seriously though, it would be pretty funny if they ended up beating out all these other games whose stories are either original, a twist on something pre-existing, or a continuing story. Would really go to show just how far the gaming industry has come by eating its own tail. For Best Art Direction, we have plenty of familiar nominees. Everything from the more cartoonish style of Astro Bot to the realistic graphics of Black Myth Wukong. However, Neva, if I'm even pronouncing it right, also managed to grab a place here, which is pretty neat considering I didn't even know the game came out. Neva was actually something on my radar back when it was announced, as it looked very dreamlike and unique compared to a lot of the other garbage surrounding it. So, despite only knowing its aesthetic, I'm glad to see its interesting art direction gets acknowledged in such a big way. Kudos to them for crafting an eye-catching vision, even if I have no clue what that vision is. For Best Score in Music, we have a multitude of nominees, but we all know that Stellar Blade is going to be a major focus here. The music was created by composer Keiichi Okabe. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, best known for his work on the Nier games. And since Nier Replicant has one of my favorite game stories ever, you have to understand why I'm biased. While I'm sure 2 or 3 of these other games have some decent soundtracks, I'm putting my hat in the ring for Eve. At least with this category, I have some idea of what's going on, thereby having the most authority to make a judgment. So I hope Stellar Blade wins, and I can't wait to see what other awards they've been nominated for. Best Audio Design, and man, Astrobot is really taking center stage today, huh? Gee, it's almost as if every other game award, Sony just happens to put out a game that just so happens to get a lot of nominations. Really crazy how that always seems to work out, even within a month of the awards ceremony. Truly a feat to behold. Regardless, it's funny to see Call of Duty getting the spotlight here, which makes me want it to win. Because sometimes, after a long hard day, you don't want to think while playing games. Sometimes, you just want to shoot. And if the sound of guns in games ain't satisfying, then I don't know what is. So I kind of hope they win, entirely for the upset it would cause. Best Performance. I don't know who these 4 people are, but these 2 are really funny. And I don't use English dubs on Japanese games, so let's move on. Ah yes, innovation and accessibility. Games that make it easier for people to play with settings that turn them into blobs or get rid of spiders. Now, I have no idea what innovations were made in the listed games, and since I'd like to get this out before the actual Game Awards, I don't care to research. So, instead, I'm just going to say that I'm sure every single one of the games on this list did something innovative in accessibility in a genuine way, because why else would they be nominated for a Game Award? So good job, guys! You really did the thing. You know, seeing Neva confined to the Games for Impact category makes me scared about what to expect from it. However, we all know that Life is Strange, My Girlfriend Fucked My Bully is going to win. But hey, maybe it's actually good since Don't Nod wasn't involved. Also, shout out to Tales of Kenzera Zhao. I still don't know if I'm pronouncing any of this shit correctly, whose use of Consultant Company and Gamergate 2.0 target Sweet Baby Inc. led to the game getting less than 250 players on Steam at its peak. I think the industry can learn a lot from this and many other blunders this year. Unfortunately, they're not going to, which is fine by me, because I love a good shitstorm. As for the category itself, I don't know much about the other games on this list, so I'm not going to talk about them. Besides, we have bigger fish to fry. Like Best Ongoing Game. After giving the award to Cyberpunk 2077 for making their game playable, the Game Awards have decided to revert the category back to its original purpose this time around. Although given Blizzard being a disaster of a company and Helldivers 2 seemingly shitting the bed, despite the fiasco earlier this year with connecting your PlayStation account, it seems pretty obvious Fortnite is going to take this one. Then again, Destiny 2 and Final Fantasy XIV still have strong fan bases, so we'll see how it shapes up. Although I do wish Shadow of the Erdtree was on here. After all, by last year's standards, it would count. Come to think of it, any game that has hotfixes and patches since then would count. Put up Stellar Blade, their updates have come with free Eve costumes. Or Palworld, which added a whole new area to the game. But I guess sometimes you have to let an actual ongoing game take the prize. Sorry bros, but I'm sure we'll... Okay, fuck it, they're not showing up again, let's get moving. Best Community Support isn't something I'm too versed in. My assumption is always going to be that No Man's Sky takes the cake because of the constant free updates they're pumping out. Though I could also see Helldivers getting the win in this category, considering all the bullshit they had to deal with earlier this year. Even though things have been quiet for a long time now surrounding the game and its popularity, at least on my end of the internet, I do think they deserve a nod for their efforts. I don't know much about the community support for the rest of them, so I'm going to have to end it here. Moving on to the next category, where we finally start talking about specific gaming genres. Now, unfortunately, I have only heard of 3 of these games, one of which, Lorelei and the Laser Eyes, I've never actually seen gameplay of. It seems kind of strange to have these 5 as the indie games of the year, especially when we've had games like Mouthwashing, Indigo Park, Nine Souls, Slitterhead, and Yellow Taxi Goes Vroom, to name a few, which have had a significantly larger impact on the indie scene this year than any of these nominations. I don't know, maybe it's just the circles I travel in and these games are actually ones every single person but me has heard of. But personally, I'm not buying that more people are into UFO 50 than Nine Souls. It just doesn't make much sense to me. So yeah, even though the indie scene is popping off this year, the selections feel a little lackluster, at least to me. but again, this could just be because I have better taste than most people. We'll have to find out. Moving on, we have Best Debut Indie Game, which also includes the legendary Manor Lords. This game was made by a single, solo developer and has sold enough to get nearly 50,000 reviews, skewing very positive on Steam. And it's still in early access, which just goes to show how impressive the guy's skills are. Whether Slavic magic is still just one person or not, I don't really know. But it's still great to see it on the list alongside Balatro and 3 games I've never heard of before. Hoping he wins, just to show how the gaming industry can still be saved even without budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Or billions if those GTA 6 rumors are true. Now, I have bad news. They have, unfortunately, sequestered Zenless Zone Zero to the best mobile game category. While I have no idea how anyone could play or even run this immaculate zoom and coom roguelike on their phone, it technically can be done through some form of sorcery. The same can be said for Wuthering Waves, though I never got past Chapter 1 because the writing made me want to drag my teeth across a chalkboard. Fun fact, while writing this script, I ended up rolling for Camellia entirely for lustful reasons. With the surprising number of rolls I had, I ended up getting some guy as my 5-star instead, and lamented the idea I'd have to play the game. However, RNGesus blessed me, and gave her to me after just 20 extra rolls. I will never play this game again. While there's no way of knowing who will win this category, I am holding out hope for a MiHoYo win, simply because I think it would be funny and would make a lot of people who like MiHoYo really mad for some reason. I don't know what it is about Genshin and Honkai Star Rail, but their fan bases have taught me one lesson. No matter how many times people try and cancel you, as long as you ignore them, they can't do anything. Because of this imparted lesson by Hoyoverse, I pray for their win in a landslide, and also so I can get free gacha rolls for Hoshimi and Burn Ice's rerun. This next category is going to be a short one because I have never played a VR game. Based on these listings, however, I am under the impression the technology is now being used to create spin-offs of pre-existing properties instead of anything genuinely new. So, I will be casting my vote to Beat Saber because of my previous addiction to Guitar Hero in my youth. Thank you, Beat Saber, for saving my life. I have no intention of ever playing you. Best action game, and oh my lord, Stellar Blade! But because people are afraid of sexiness these days, neither Stellar Blade nor Black Myth Wukong stand a chance. Instead, I think it'll be Space Marine 2, which I'm okay with because there's nothing cooler than shooting a bunch of in-game aliens to death. And since it's newer than Helldivers and fresher in people's minds, I'd wager there's going to be a good number of people who go for it, regardless of whether it deserves it. I'm sorry, Eve, but big, muscular men are simply more action-packed than your limber, curvy body. Forgive me. The best action-adventure game category includes games we've seen before, Ubisoft's last good game, the game that bankrupted them, and Nintendo's latest Bing Bing Wahoo simulator. I honestly don't expect anyone but Astrobot to win this category, seeing as, like I said before, it's Sony's first real game in a decade. Although it would be hilarious, again, if Silent Hill 2 won. You know, the game whose original action aspects were supposed to be janky to enhance the fear factor, but has now been turned into Resident Evil Light. If that wins, then it just cements the gaming industry as starting its death spiral, as if the intro of this video didn't prove it already. But now we come to one of the more important categories, Best RPG. While I'm a fan of the 7s due to their familiar and simplistic design, the 26 Aglin also looks cool, offering a bazooka-like aesthetic. As for video games, Shadow of the Erd Tree appears once again because it's a game you can definitely buy on its own. 4chan's Monkey's Paw also appears here, alongside 2 other games from familiar franchises. I'm not going to lie, from an outsider looking in, none of these really feel like RPGs I would want to play for the RPG elements specifically outside the DLC title. Okay, maybe Like a Dragon, but I need to touch Yakuza first, so that's why I'm iffy. I'd rather something more fantastical and unique, and don't really see it here. So, I'm declaring the 26 Aglin as the best RPG of 2024. Congrats, buddy. Maybe you can hunt down this tank destroyer that's been getting on my nerves lately. Speaking of hunting, this next category is Like a Jungle, because it's full of predators. No, I'm just kidding. This is Best Fighting Game, not Best Fighting Game Tournament. While the inclusion of a literal port collection dead center is highly amusing, so too would be the idea of Multiverses winning anything. Specifically because it's made by Warner Bros., whose release of Hogwarts Legacy probably put a solid dent in those billions of dollars of debt. You know, if they hadn't accidentally overvalued their TV brands by $10 billion. Regardless, I don't play fighting games, so it doesn't really matter to me who wins. However, I'll throw my hat in the ring for this one and say it should be Tekken 8, because I heard Tekken lore is really cool. I've never seen Dragon Ball, and I know what they did to Grand Blue Fantasy.
They did. Who's they? You know, they're bastards.
You know things aren't going so hot in the gaming industry when the best looking lineup so far are the ones in the best family game section. Or maybe that is a good thing, since historically speaking, it is children to young adults that have time to actually sit down and play video games. Or maybe it's a time management thing, who can say? However, all of these games look pretty good, and while my bias as a Nintendrone tells me to root for Peach or Zelda, it would be a shock if Astro Bot didn't win this section. It has a broader appeal than the more experimental game styles of everything else. Well, aside from Mario Party, which, you know what? Yeah, Mario Party could also take the crown. I wouldn't be shocked if the plumber managed to beat out the competition in a fiery upset. The best section so far, but unfortunately, we still aren't done. Best Simulation and Strategy Game. Ah yes, the one category that makes me hate myself for not having played anything in the genre despite having an interest in doing so. I do not know enough about any of these games to say anything. However, I have seen gameplay of the first Frostpunk before, and I thought it looked pretty cool. If the sequel wound up winning, I don't think it'd be too upsetting as an outsider looking in. However, much like the indie game section, part of me hopes Manor Lords wins. While Unicorn Overlord was one of my top anticipated games of the year, not that I played it, someone free me from this nightmare. This isn't a joke, please stop watching! I do think a solo dev project winning this one would be cool, especially since it seems to have lots of love behind it from those who purchased it. I think it'd be funny, and funny is good. Now it's time for Best Sports Game, which WWE, okay? On what planet do any of these win against the greatest franchise of all time, where you can get a bunch of big, sweaty dudes in a ring to beat the shit out of each other? Also, is it just me, or do the glossy covers of the people here look, and I say they look, which doesn't mean they are, almost AI enhanced? Not in like a Photoshop way. I mean in that way AI enhances images by brightening them up and making it look like someone dragged paint smears across them. I don't know, maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me and tennis players are just that shiny in real life, but I have no evidence outside of my opinion, which means I'm probably insane. Well, we've already established that at this point. I meant specifically about this. Oh boy. Best Multiplayer. Now this one is actually tough because, to my knowledge, everything here has a rather dedicated base of people playing them. While I'm not quite sure what's going on with Helldivers 2, I think they have the least likely chance of winning. And while COD would be funny, I think Warhammer or Mario probably have it in the bag. I also would like to see either of them win. It appears whenever Mario Party shows up, the category is much less appalling. Perhaps the sheer panic on Bowser's face grants me warmth. Yes, I think they'll win at least one section they're in because the Mario. Now, this category is going to be a contentious one. Best Adaptation. Gee, I wonder who's going to win. I wonder which show, out of all these on the list, is going to take home the prize of Best Adaptation. Who, oh, who could it possibly be? Yeah, as funny as it'd be to see Knuckles get the crown, and even though Fallout has more than a 0% chance, it's gonna be Arcane. Now, I understand there is a debate around the quality of Season 2 compared to Season 1, and I agree, it's not as good. But I also quite liked it, and one character from Season 2 Episode 4 almost got me to play League. But never fear, I am immune to propaganda, mostly, and will instead use the time I could be having fun making videos like this. Arcane is probably going to win, and I'm okay with that. I am chill, if you will. But in my heart, Knuckles will be my favorite of this list for the Puppet Iblis cameo alone. The more difficult category on this list, however, is probably Most Anticipated Game, because there's a lot. We have Daryl Dixon Season 2.5, Grand Theft Billion Bust, the Metroid game everyone thought was fake, and Capcom's Swan Song. Oh, there's also Ghosts of Tsushima But Not, which I have to see more of before having a firm opinion on, to put it nicely. But yeah, GTA is gonna sweep this since it's Rockstar's first game in the franchise in forever. Plus, it might have a budget exceeding the GDP of some small African countries, so it probably needs the promotion a win like this would bring if they want to make their money back. Now, as for content creator of the Is That Usada Pecora? Yes, Hololive is finally getting some representation at the Game Awards, alongside all these guys I've never heard of. We already know she's gonna sweep, and it's a big win for VTubers the world over to have her at the Game Awards. While I like my hobby niche, I understand it can't stay that way when it's corporate. So all I pray is that this doesn't change anything in-house, no matter what investors are currently vying for. Alright, but who could forget? Best Esports Game. An extension of Best Multiplayer, this is for those who participate in the pyramid scheme that is playing video games for money. What? Me? Jealous? Pfft. Absurd. Given the popularity of Arcane, League of Legends seems like a safe bet for sure. But I suppose it depends on how many Victor mains are pissed they're changing his lore to align with a TV show. Perhaps this is a reminder, from whatever mercy God has left, that trusting Riot Games is like trusting a spider to catch you when you fall, but without his spider's web, which is stronger than steel pound for pound. Alright, these next categories are esports, and I don't watch esports, so we're speedrunning it. Best esports athlete, whichever of them plays League. Best esports team, the one named after Link's guardian angel. And finally, we have player's choice, which, at the time of recording, isn't up yet. So instead, I'll just say something generic like, whoa, that's a lot of video games! And now we've circled back around to the beginning. Game of the Year. Everything from the best game direction category is here, including one curious addition: Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree. Now you're probably asking yourself why a $40 DLC you can only access with a $60 game is on this list. And that's because the Dorito Pope baptizes his favorites. Literal days before the Game Awards lineup was announced, it was revealed DLC and other game additions are now eligible for Game of the Year. It appears the excuse is that, because Shadow of the Erdtree has enough content that an actual game would have, it should count as a contender in the top category. And while I don't want to knock From Software on making such a massive addition to the base game, I'm sorry, but a DLC winning Game of the Year just sounds so stupid. Like, we already know it's gonna win, right? The rules wouldn't be changed if it wasn't going to win again. But if anything, this speaks to the AAA gaming industry as a whole, if a fucking DLC to a 2-year-old game is going to end up winning Game of the Year. While some categories at the Game Awards have worthwhile looking games in them, there are many that feel suspicious to say the least. I think, given how much of a financial beating mainstream studios have taken this year, some games have been chosen in different categories as safety nets. Balatro in Game of the Year, Anime Gachas in Best Mobile, all these indie games I've never heard of, therefore no one else has. It's very lukewarm for the ceremony, likely because AAA studios have had so many failures this year. I mean, come on. Do you really expect Star Wars Outlaws to win anything? Overall, this whole thing feels kind of whatever this year, with some games that I do hope win in their categories, but many that don't offer much in the way of any notable impressions. If the lesson you've learned here is that I'm retarded, then you must be new. In which case, hi, hello, subscribe for more dog shit. However, there is, shockingly, another to be gleaned. The gap between what people really want and what big game ceremonies and companies want people to want is widening with every passing year. And I think the absence of Palworld anywhere on this list, or other popular games like Nine Souls or insert your favorite indie game here, show the gaming industry is scared. They are afraid of the direction their own industry is going because a lot of larger studios are no longer viewed as the cultural cornerstones of gaming. Things are changing, and this year's Game Awards nominees feel reflective of those growing pains. While it appears 2025 is going to be a comeback year for some, with Sony planning more original titles and some hotly anticipated games getting finished, there's equally as many hot indie games or general small studios pushing out exciting experiences. I think this is a transition point in the industry, and I'm curious to see how the Game Awards will be impacted by this new zeitgeist into the future. But honestly, what the fuck do I know? I'm an anime avatar who hasn't even played any of these fucking things. I'm just spouting bullshit because I thought it'd be fun. I will likely be tuning into the Game Awards, and if anything catches my eye, perhaps I'll make a follow-up. But for now, I think it'll be full of lukewarm presentations, obvious winners, and Elden Ring fellatio at the very end. Will this be the return of everyone's favorite Jewish rabbi, Bill Clinton? Whether he makes a comeback or not, he will always remain Game of the Year in my heart. Looking forward to next year when Genshin Impact's final region gets nominated for the big category.